History remembers King Richard I as a chivalric hero and a crusader bathed in glory. But behind the broadswords and the folklore, his reign was driven by a cold, ledger-based reality. Richard operated with a specific macroeconomic philosophy, treating England as a taxable asset portfolio designed to underwrite a lifetime of global warfare. Over his 10-year reign, Richard spent barely 6 months physically inside the borders of England. Analyzing his rule requires looking past the mythology to examine the mechanisms of capital extraction, naval logistics, and military-industrial engineering. To understand the true scale of the Lionheart's reach, we must look at his balance sheets. This map shows the massive geographic footprint of the Angevin Empire. It functioned as a multinational enterprise, stretching from the Scottish border down through Normandy, Maine, Anjou, Touraine, and Aquitaine in modern-day France. Holding these lands created constant vulnerability. The English Channel split the territories in half, leaving a jagged eastern border directly pressing against the rival domains of the French king, Philip II. Richard managed this sprawling enterprise from afar, using a self-regulating administrative machine. He relied on justiciars, royal deputies who governed in his absence, and the exchequer, the central royal treasury, to maintain financial control. Upon taking the throne, Richard took immediate action to maximize his liquidity. He aggressively sold state assets, auctioned off sheriff's posts, earldoms, and official government positions to the highest bidder. These political appointments were less about governing the English people and more about generating massive, immediate cash injections for the royal war chest. In 1188, the crown implemented the Saladin Tithe, an aggressive mechanism for domestic capital extraction designed to fund the upcoming Crusade. The mathematics of the tithe were severe. It demanded a mandatory 10% tallage, a type of land and property tax, on all revenues and movable properties across the kingdom. Enforcement was handled by local parish priests and Templar knights, military monks dedicated to the defense of the Holy Land. Any subject who disagreed with their wealth assessment faced immediate imprisonment or excommunication from the church. This chart tracks English crown revenue. The baseline revenue of £10,505 spiked violently upward, passing £31,000 by 1190. Monetization reached the highest levels. William Longchamp paid £3,000 simply to retain his position as chancellor. Richard was pragmatic about his needs, stating publicly that he would sell London itself if he could only find a buyer. By combining the Saladin Tithe with mass asset liquidation, Richard successfully weaponized the English economy, securing the capital required for industrial-scale warfare. Moving the theater of war to the Mediterranean meant the Third Crusade functioned as an astronomical, high-risk operating expense. The logistical requirements for outfitting, transporting, and feeding a 17,000-man army across the sea were immense, demanding an uninterrupted flow of capital. During the journey eastward, Richard executed a strategic invasion of Cyprus. Capturing the island was a calculated maneuver. To sustain Christian beachheads in the Levant, Richard required a secure, reliable maritime supply base close to the combat zone. Once in the Holy Land, he applied this same financial efficiency to direct combat. During the Siege of Acre, Richard paid his sappers direct cash incentives to physically tunnel beneath and undermine the city walls. Richard's success was driven by outspending and outsupplying his rivals, treating the Crusade as a cold economic war of attrition. In 1192, Richard's trajectory was severed by a massive logistics failure. He was captured near Vienna by Leopold of Austria and transferred to the custody of the Holy Roman Emperor. The emperor demanded a staggering price for his release, 150,000 marks. This equated to roughly 100,000 pounds of pure silver. This diagram illustrates the scale of that demand. The ransom was equivalent to 2 to 3 times the English crown's entire annual income. To prevent a complete sovereign default, the administrators back in England levied an emergency 25% tax on the population. The state utilized extreme measures to cover the sudden shortfall. They taxed the clergy, confiscated church gold and silver, and demanded noblemen as hostages. Geopolitical rivals attempted to manipulate the situation. Richard's brother, John, and King Philip II of France offered the emperor 80,000 marks specifically to keep Richard imprisoned. Once collected, the physical transport of the silver across Europe was done entirely at the king's peril. Any theft or loss along the route meant the money was gone and the debt remained. Freeing the CEO effectively bankrupted the corporation. Richard was released in 1194, returning to an England that was financially drained as a new war with France began. Needing to defend his borders with an empty treasury, Richard turned to Normandy and initiated his final capital expenditure, Château Gaillard. The site served a strict strategic purpose. Positioned high above the River Seine, it was designed to physically block the French military advance into Normandy and choke off a vital transport route. The construction cost an estimated £12,000, more than double Richard's total spending on all castle infrastructure back in England. Built at a blistering pace, the project deployed massive labor forces to complete a decade's worth of engineering in just 2 years. Richard intensely micromanaged the project. Acting as the primary military architect, he oversaw the site to ensure maximum defensive return on his investment. Château Gaillard stood as a brutal military-industrial complex, a physical manifestation of the very last of England's extracted wealth. The fortress relied on the engineering principle of concentric defense, the use of nested layers of walls to protect a central point. The structure was divided into an outer, middle, and inner bailey, 3 separate fortified enclosures separated by deep, rock-cut dry moats that forced advancing attackers into fatal bottlenecks. The architectural masterpiece was the inner bailey, which featured an unprecedented scalloped or corrugated curtain wall. This diagram shows the mathematical advantage of the scalloped design. Overlocking curves eliminated all blind spots, allowing archers a clear line of sight. The curved masonry was also engineered to deflect kinetic energy, allowing incoming projectiles to glance off rather than striking flat stone dead-on. Richard did not live to test his walls. In 1199, he met a sudden, unceremonious death from a crossbow bolt at Chaillot, leaving his optimized, expensive war machine to his brother John. Richard I was a brilliant architectural tactician and a fearsome military CEO, but history's ledgers record him as a ruinously expensive warlord who bled his own kingdom dry to build an empire.